Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx and to who is now watching this video. The Geneva Environment Network has the pleasure to welcome you today virtually for a special Wednesday for the Planet, held in the run-up to World Wildlife Day, which is officially celebrated on 3rd of March, which is tomorrow. Today, we are discussing and presenting the documentary Naturosphere Factor, on a bold experiment to bring African wild dogs back to the Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. I hope you enjoyed this great film. For the live discussion that we are going to have now, we are delighted to welcome virtually to Geneva Jared Litworth, the executive producer and head of outreach and impact of HHMI Tangle Bank Studios. Jared, feel free to correct me if I didn't pronounce correctly the name.
That was
and
perfect.
We are also, thank you. And we are also welcoming from South Africa, Cole Duplessis, who is lead of Wild Dog Expansion Project at Endangered Wildlife Trust. Welcome, Cole.
Thank you very much.
We have also with us Karen Gaynor, Scientific Support Officer at the Secretariat of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, known as CITES. I want to bring to your attention that we have a chat function and a Q&A available on the WebEx platform. And we are also streaming this event. It's a public event, but you could bring your questions in the comments for who is online with us on social networks, and for who is on WebEx, please use the chat and the Q&A function. So as the screening and discussion today is organized within the framework of the World Wildlife Day, as I earlier mentioned, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Karen Gaynor from CITES to deliver welcoming remarks and also explain the relevance of the film we have invited you to watch to this year's theme. With that, Karen, over to you.
Firstly, let me thank Diana and her team at Geneva Environment Network for helping to arrange this discussion today. And secondly, let me warmly welcome all of you to this event. As you know, World Wildlife Day is celebrated on March the 3rd every year to raise awareness about issues that impact wildlife. The first World Wildlife Day celebration was held back in 2014, and this year's event will be celebrated under the theme Recovering Key Species for Ecosystem Restoration. The celebrations will seek to draw attention to the conservation status of some of the most critically endangered species of wild fauna and flora, to stimulate discussions towards imagining and implementing solutions to conserve them. To give some context, according to data from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, its red list of threatened species, over 8,400 species of wild fauna and flora are now considered critically endangered, while close to another 30,000 are understood to be endangered or vulnerable. And based on these estimates, it's suggested that over 1 million species are now threatened with extinction. And these are frightening statistics, especially when we consider that people everywhere rely on wildlife and biodiversity-based resources to meet all our needs, from food to fuel, medicines, housing and clothing. Millions of people also rely on nature as the source of their livelihoods and economic opportunities. And therefore, continued loss of species, habitats and ecosystems also threatens all life on Earth, including humans. This year's World Wildlife Day theme also highlights the importance of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which runs from 2021 to 2030. Ecosystems are only healthy when their component species thrive, and species cannot thrive without a healthy ecosystem. So it is all about achieving balance. If just one keystone species disappears, an entire ecosystem can start to decline and die. And this is why actions to protect individual species must go hand in hand with restoring entire ecosystems. I would also like to thank the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and Jackson Wild, who have teamed up with the CITES Secretariat once more to organise this international film showcase as part of the celebration of the 2022 UN World Wildlife Day. The showcase, which is the 7th of its kind, it highlights films that explore threats weighing on endangered species of wild fauna and flora, their central importance for their habitats and ecosystems, and for the communities who live near them, and the numerous initiatives that are setting out to conserve them. So for our discussion today, we are focusing on the film Nature's Fear Factor, which I trust you have all had an opportunity to view. From a CITES perspective, the fates of individual species and entire ecosystems are inextricably and intimately linked. This year's celebration of World Wildlife Day focuses on how we can protect key species that play a particularly vital part in shaping how their ecosystem functions and their contributions to ecosystem health. From global treaties like CITES to small-scale local projects, these diverse efforts can boost many success stories and important advances. While the biodiversity crisis remains serious, we can draw inspiration from the many positive actions being taken by governments, NGOs, and concerned citizens alike. And this is very well displayed in the film that we will be discussing today. But this day is a chance to celebrate the partnerships like the private-public partnership at Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique that are working to re-establish the natural balance between species, while at the same time acknowledging the challenges we still face to stop irreversible damage. And one such partnership that I would specifically like to mention is the joint CITES CMS African Carnivores Initiative, which again is very closely linked to this film because through this initiative, CITES and CMS Secretariats are working together on 4 African carnivore species: African lion, leopard, cheetah, and actually the African wild dog. And as part of this initiative, CITES and CMS will work in close cooperation with the IUCN and its specialist groups. So before we start the discussions today, I think it is important to highlight that it's our actions that have brought us to this critical point. And it is only by working together that we will find a way to conserve and sustainably use the diverse wildlife that supports us. And on that note, thank you all, and I look forward to a stimulating discussion. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Karen. So let's move on, and let me introduce a little bit better Jared Lipworth, who is an executive producer, as I mentioned earlier. Jared is an Emmy winning executive producer who has overseen hundreds of hours of science, history, and natural history programs. And prior to joining HHMI Tangled Bank Studios, Jared, you were the Vice President of Specials at the National Geographic Studios. With that, you being an Emmy winning executive producer with experience working on various scientific topics, Jared, how your background in storytelling is definitely key to making this film a success. How do you think international institutions like CITES can communicate such important issues like this year's World Wildlife Team recovery key species for ecosystems restoration?
Yeah, I think that's key to getting the message across. Thank you so much for having me and for screening the film. We're really excited to get the message of this film out there and to give people an opportunity to see it. I think for as long as I've been making films, it's always been about the storytelling. If you tell a good story, you can teach people a whole lot when they're not looking. If you set out to teach them something, it becomes much harder in the film world, in the media world, to get the ideas to stick, to get the importance to stick with the viewers. So I think for a story like this, right from the beginning, we recognized that it had so many layers that would make it a good story. From the fact that there was this reintroduction of dogs on its own, a species that is critically endangered. Here was an opportunity to tell the story of a reintroduction to a location that could become a stronghold for the wild dogs in the future. That in itself was interesting. The story of Gorongosa is another incredible layer of a place that most had thought was irreparable. But through data-driven conservation efforts and science efforts, they had slowly they were turning this place into a viable ecosystem again. And we were lucky enough to have access to the wild dog story from the very beginning. So we were able to capture what it was like before the dogs were there, what the problems were because the wild dogs weren't there, and then follow that process all the way through so that we could see how the dogs started to impact the ecosystem. So all of that, that's already kind of two big layers that would make for a good story. And then on top of it, for us, we're a science production company. We're all about science education and about helping people understand and appreciate and be inspired by the scientific stories in the world around us. So on top of all of that, we also had this layer of landscape of fear. This idea that predators are not important just because of what they eat, but because of the way they change behavior. And if we had set out to make that film without Gorongosa, it would have been, we could have done it. It could have been a great film, but it wouldn't have had the relevance that having the dogs at the center gave us. So we were able to tell the story of the fear factor, of the landscape of fear, and how the dogs come in and are crucial, and predators in general are crucial to an ecosystem because of the way they affect the other animals around them. So, for us, it was about those layers that created a great story, and some great characters and some great work that was being done. So, the advice to anyone who wants to tell the story is find the connection points on a personal level for both your experts and for your viewers, and build the story around those. Build the story around something that is going to appeal to folks who may not necessarily be attracted to the data or to the graphs or to the numbers, but tell that great story, and then you can get all the information you want into your project.
Thank you. Documentary films are a powerful tool for conservation, and it's partly what you have also mentioned now. They are a great way of bringing nature and biodiversity issues to the attention of people. Can these documentaries have other important roles to play, such as for fundraising, or also, for example, have the opposite effect by inviting poachers to the locations you are filming?
So I'll take the poacher side first. Yeah, I mean, that is always something we have to be careful about. There have been films I've worked on where where we specifically didn't show the locations or give any kind of information that would help people with bad intent find the animals that we are featuring. On the other side of it, yeah, I mean, we're an impact studio. I'm an executive producer. I work on specific shows. But the goal for us is really about outreach and really about how do you have the maximum impact once the film has been made. So we do a whole lot of work to figure out for every project, how do we take this story beyond the film? How do we do events like this? How do we get the word out about these efforts that are being done around the world in a way that can be relevant to people wherever they are? A lot of different ways we approach that, I think there is. I'll give you some examples. We did another film about Gorongosa, actually called Our Gorongosa, which was a film not about the wildlife, but about the commitment that Gorongosa has to the local communities. So it was a film that looked at the incredible efforts they're doing there to, for healthcare, for children's education. And that's a film that we created never thinking it was going to have a mass audience. This was a film that was created for a very small, very specific audience to help them understand the positive benefits of that connection between human development and conservation. We were lucky enough that film turned out to be a very, very powerful film with very strong characters, and it has reached a mass audience as well. But it was specifically designed to help to tell the story of Gorongosa's efforts to showcase a new model of conservation for the conservation community, for the human development community. So I think that's I think one of my favorite examples of a film that was created not for the general audience, but for a specific audience with a certain goal in mind. On other projects we work on, we create huge outreach campaigns. So we've got a film that just aired recently on bees, and one cinematographer who during COVID was stuck in his backyard and basically filmed the bees in his backyard and saw over 60 different species, followed them over the course of a year. And he lives in Bristol, England. He's one of the premier cinematographers in the world. He's usually out developing special macro cameras to tell the stories of creatures that nobody else could tell. And here we had this incredibly intimate film about his year during COVID, his year with the bees in his backyard. It was a very sweet, very beautiful film, very local to his backyard. But we used that to build out an outreach campaign with libraries and PBS stations across the U.S. so that local viewers can get involved in understanding the critical importance of pollinators in their local ecosystems, and with calls to action to come out and protect those pollinators. Plant 1 square foot of wildflowers in your own backyard helps attract native pollinators. So, again, I think just another example of how you take a film, you take a story, and then you figure out, how do you maximize that impact? How do you get the word out? How do you tie into the how do you make the stories relevant to people wherever they are?
Thank you very much for sharing this interesting example and story. Let's move on to our next panelist, Cole Duplessis. I have mentioned earlier, Cole, that you are leading the Wild Dog Expansion Project at the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and I will let you explain a little bit more what you do. And Cole, we can mention that since you were a kid, you have always loved wildlife. How did your career take you to work particularly with wild dogs, and moreover, their reintroduction to their natural habitat to restore the ecosystem?
Well, great. I think first of all, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, so in short, my name is Cole Duplessis, and I work for the Endangered Wildlife Trust. My key role within the organization is to coordinate the Wild Dog Range Expansion Project. And in terms of just, I think, backing up in terms of how that came to be, it was, what's already been touched on in this talk is, we're dealing with animals that are highly endangered and for various reasons. In the case of African wild dogs, it's because of disease, human development in the form of, agriculture, roads, urbanization, and so on. And basically a variety of different diseases that have seen wild dogs now locally extinct or extirpated, at least in 25 of the 39 countries that they once roamed. So, it's a real massive knock to the population. And from that, we only have about 6,000 wild dogs left in Africa. And I think what's more concerning is if you're only counting your breeding pairs, you're only sitting with about 700 breeding pairs left on the continent. So I guess in terms of how I got to this, like so many things, somebody said the other day, wild dogs often find you versus you finding them. And it was much the same, I think, in my career, where I was very fortunate to get given a job. I just come out of a degree in environmental science. I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do at that stage. So I ended up becoming a guide, or at least training to become a guide. And I quickly realized that this wasn't for me. I wanted to be hands-on and actually be conserving and be out there and doing some hands-on work. And I was very fortunate to get a role as a priority species monitor as my very first job in conservation. And I remember very quickly the park manager came to me and said, listen, the wild dogs on this reserve are under the most threat, and this is where you need to spend your time. And at that stage, as a sort of new conservationist coming onto the scene, I remember thinking, there were so many other cool animals such as lions and elephants and cheetah that were on the reserve, and I really wanted to spend time with them. And I thought, well, if this is my job and it's what I'm being told to do, then so be it. So for the next 2.5 years of my career, I actually spent that time monitoring a specific pack of wild dogs. And unfortunately, in an area where snaring, which is one of the major threats too, which I didn't mention before, snaring was quite rife in this particular area. And it was my job to find them twice a day, every day. And through that, I actually, in a very special way, started really becoming a part of the pack, and I saw the pack grow. The pack, in the time that I was there, had grown from 6 wild dogs that had all been snared at least once in their lifetime, to a pack that had grown up to 40 wild dogs. And funnily enough, where the story all becomes quite special for me it was some of those wild dogs that were actually eventually the first wild dogs that were introduced into Gorongosa National Park. So the story sort of came full circle. But before I jump too far ahead, after monitoring this very special species and just learning how complex these animals are, just so social, loving, bold, there's just so many words to describe them. I think after about 2.5 years, I thought, let me step back. Like I wanted to work at things at a higher level. And that actually drove me to do my master's in protected area management. And I did that over in Australia, only to find that I was really missing the African bush so much. And missing it that much drove me to return back to Africa and actually get a job that I'm doing now with wild dogs. So I think by combining my degree in protected area management and all the monitoring experience that I gained over the years in terms of dealing more locally with the species, it really like solidified my love for conserving not just that pack but for the species as a whole. And yeah, it gave way to me being so actively involved in the Gorongosa wild dog reintroduction.
Thank you, Cole. In the film, for example, we saw that at the beginning they introduced 14 dogs, and at the end of the film there were about 40 dogs already. What is the situation today? Do you have the current numbers?
Yeah, I must say it's a huge success story. I think the quick answer in the recent counts, so every 4 months we actually do new counts to always monitor the progress of this introduction. From the 2 packs introduced, we're now actually sitting at 125 wild dogs. And since then, we've also injected 2 or 3 groups of wild dogs just to keep that genetic diversity alive. Obviously, it's not about just growing the population numbers, but we want to grow the genetic diversity too. And I think just what's of interest there, in terms of some of the background, we spend like a long time working and modeling like what we think might happen. But at the end of the day, when it comes to wild animals like these, you just can't really predict the success. You can to a degree, but you really, and we do have a very rigid feasibility assessment that happens before we undertake reintroductions like this. But yeah, we were sort of hoping in the ballpark of about 80 wild dogs as an end success. The fact that we're now in a position where the wild dogs have done so well, new packs have naturally formed, which is actually, when you look at our IUCN rankings and a recent paper that we did on the Gorongosa wild dogs, a big part of what we need to do is actually clarify what the ultimate success is. And in this case, we've actually had wild dogs giving birth to pups. Those pups then grow up to adulthood, leave their natal pack, and go find each other in the wild and form new packs. And for that, that's like our ultimate version of success. But I think what's even more exciting is in the last 12 months, we've actually also reintroduced some wild dogs into Malawi, also a country that haven't seen wild dogs for a very long time. And what's quite exciting is we've actually been able to source wild dogs now from Gorongosa all these years later and take them to other countries or areas where they've become locally extinct. So yeah, in terms of their numbers, I think they've ticked all the boxes in terms of their genetic diversity, their pack formations, the success in rearing their pups growing up and dispersing and forming new packs. They've really ticked all the boxes of a successful reintroduction.
And replicating the story in other parts, Specifically on this project, can you maybe tell us a little bit more on other interesting observations you have, whether on the dog's behavior, the grazing species, or even the whole ecosystem per se?
Yes, for sure. I think there's a twofold answer to this, because again, when we're assessing in terms of what we've seen, I think just speaking first at a species level, locally we've learned through this that, it's the first ever reintroduction into Mozambique, and we've seen the success come from that. And there's been so many lessons learned in terms of what can work and putting wild dogs back into these open systems, that that success can now, be broadcast to a more level regionally and not just locally. And then I think more on an ecological level, Jared did such a fantastic job of summing it up earlier. But in terms of that ecological role that wild dogs have brought to the party, and that fear factor that we keep talking about, it's really clear, and it comes out so well in this documentary, just that ecological balance that wild dogs have restored into Gorongosa National Park. So yeah, as I said, I think both at a species level and at an ecological level, it's just been of such high impact, in terms of what we've been able to observe.
Thank you, Cole. And in the film, we saw also that there are plans to reintroduce other key predators species. You even documented leopards. That's amazing. Will this mean that there will be more fear in the landscape? What are the predators for managing also the fear that the dogs will have from big cats? And also, yeah, if there are other species, please mention them, because there was a specific question on the chat on other species you are planning to reintroduce in the park.
I mean, that's a fantastic question. So look, at this stage, the next priority, and it was also mentioned in the documentary, but the next priority is actually to start reintroducing hyena back into the system, more specifically spotted hyena. And then I think in addition, at some point there might be a bit of work on the lions. There hasn't been a lot of lion work to date, but I think just for keeping and managing that genetic diversity, obviously that will be very important, because again, like, we want healthy lions in the system. And then to date, there's been about 4 or 5 leopards reintroduced also into Gorongosa. So in the documentary, the one was showcased, which it was amazing. They said in the documentary the first time in 10 years that a leopard had been seen or officially documented. But yeah, since then, in the last 2 years or so, there's been, I think it's 5 leopards now reintroduced into the system. And each of those have also been collared and monitored and seem to be doing well. So yeah, I think in terms of the fear factor, I think in terms of what these predators bring is the diversity of fear. And what I mean by that is all these predators bring different attributes into an ecosystem. A lion, for example, they live in their pride and they're powerful animals, and for that reason they can take larger prey. A leopard, they're all about the stalking and observing their prey and hunting smaller things. Wild dogs, I think, and it's one of the reasons why they're my favorite animal, is they only weigh about 25 to 30 kgs. They only run about 70 kilometers an hour. And when you compare them to other predators, like lions, leopards, and cheetah, for example, they don't have that impact, the special strengths and speeds that these other animals have. But what they do have is intelligence and strategy. There's a lot of communication and coordinating that goes on into a hunt. So in terms of what wild dogs bring, they specialize in that certain type of prey. And I think where they bring the fear factor is, in the documentary, you saw the diverse types of habitat. African wild dogs are just so strategic in the way that they hunt, is they can flush animals out of thicker areas or chase animals into a drainage line. Or everything that forms part of their hunt is very strategic. And I think for that reason, they bring a certain fear factor that some of the other predators won't bring, but they also can't contribute to what lions and hyenas might be able to do. So it's really special in terms of what I say in our diversity of fear factor. I think there's that. And then I think just looking at the Gorongosa landscape, you know, the Gorongosa team over the last 12 years or so have just done such a fantastic job of restoring it, where your prey numbers are really on the increase. The habitat's been restored, and basically that creates a platform for all these predators to coexist with one another. So, for example, in the case of wild dogs, like, it is true that hyenas and lions are one of their main threats, and there's always going to be this interspecific competition between carnivores. But I think what makes Gorongosa quite unique is there is just so much food and such rich, diverse resources there that, you know, a landscape like that can really serve and sustain a whole predator guild, and not just, or a whole carnivore guild, and not just wild dogs.
And I would just add to that you know, I think the other thing that's unique there is the baseline scientific work that they've been doing for so long. So you know, it's not, as you said, it's not haphazard when they decide to do these reintroductions. It's very carefully planned. They weren't going to reintroduce anything until the lion population had rebounded to you know, to a safe level. They wouldn't have brought the hyenas in early on because of the potential conflict between the lions and the hyenas. So you know, I part of the storytelling appeal to me is this this process, this ongoing process there. As you say, you plan ahead, but then you never know what's going to happen, and so they are planning ahead. They're seeing what happens and then making the decisions about the next ones. And you know, that's why they went to the leopards next. You know, I remember Paula telling me quite often that, you know, ultimate goal is the hyenas, that they are so crucial to that landscape, but they don't want to bring them in too early so that they could threaten the population and the rebound of the lions and the others. So you know, from a storytelling perspective, from a model of conservation, that's one of the other really appealing things about Gorongosa, is that data-driven commitment to, you know, to science and to understanding the ecology as it's happening. It's never, you know, when we talked about this, you know, this was a park where you know, 95 or more % of the large mammals had been wiped out during the conflict in the Civil War. It was never about restoring a previous balance. It was about creating a current balance. And you know, I think that's a really important element where they're looking to create, they're being involved from a scientific perspective, from a conservation perspective, with the goal of creating a landscape that is today's balanced ecosystem.
Thank you to both of you for sharing these very interesting comments and your passion. And indeed, it seems that we have a few more stories to tell in films in the coming months and years, from what we hear here. Let me come back to Karen. I'm sure she has been very inspired with a lot, with everything she has heard so far. And let's come back.
I just wanted to ask a question before you ask me another one, Diana. I just wanted to ask a question because before I worked in the UN, I worked in the National Parks and Wildlife Service in Ireland, and much of our work was around developing management plans. And I know how complicated it is in terms of how you structure this. And I was curious, in the case of Gorongosa, what is the management structure there? How is there a management plan? Is it adaptive? How is it agreed what the next step will be? And you know, what is the overall view or vision for Gorongosa? Maybe if you could explain how these decisions are made about which species to introduce next, or I'd be fascinated in that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, and that's really the crux of so much of, you know, of this work is, you know, I saw a comment earlier just in terms of the reintroduction itself, and in so many ways, and take nothing away from the success since the wild dogs touched down in Gorongosa, but this whole process, I remember when I first started chatting to the Gorongosa team, you know, we probably took about 18 months just to get to the point of actually flying the wild dogs there, because of the level of planning and that goes into it. So just speaking more on the wild dog front first, in terms of this wild dog range expansion project work that we do, You know, we're basically looking for sites around Southern Africa where wild dogs have become locally extinct, and we want to reintroduce them into those areas. But the very first step is actually in the criteria. There's 10 different points that we run through, which is just a very simple desktop assessment that looks at your carrying capacity, your predator numbers, your fences, your communities, your disease history, your buy-in, and so on. It's quite a rigorous assessment. It's simple but rigorous in the sense that it very quickly shows the green flags and the red flags. And then, of course, there's also the IUCN guidelines that we follow very closely for any reintroduction. And obviously, in the case of Gorongosa, if there weren't those threats that had been addressed, you know, because the first question before undertaking any reintroduction is, well, why are there no wild dogs in the first place? No, or whatever the species might be. And it would be, I think, highly irresponsible to put an endangered species into any system if that threat hadn't been mitigated or removed. So we really had to look very closely at Gorongosa because obviously we knew the reasons for why the species were missing, but we also knew that this was an open landscape, and what would the wild dogs do? And from that, we really had to simulate different scenarios and look at what we wanted out of this, as you say, effectively a management plan. I think what was also difficult, though, is trying to jump too far ahead in terms of that prediction. So very simply put, the first step was just to collar every single individual in the pack, which seems very extreme, and it was a highly costly thing to do. But we needed to know exactly the successes and failures of the reintroduction. On day one, they could have just left the boma and ran straight out into the community, and we would have, you know, been, you know, caught with our tail between the legs, excuse the pun. But what I'm getting at is, in this whole feasibility assessment that we were doing, we were also working for carrying capacity, and we wanted to figure out how many wild dogs would be a desirable number. And from this modeling, from the modeling that we've used in the past, it really takes in your predator, your prey numbers and the size of the protected area. And our expectation was in the realm of, say, 80 wild dogs, about 8 packs, consisting at an average of 10. And that's what also made this management plan quite difficult, because a pack could be 2, or it could be 20, or it could be 30. In fact, one of the packs at the moment in Gorongosa are up to 30. So in terms of a management plan, and you touched on it, but it was highly flexible with a lot of feedback loops. And even today, we're still looking very closely at that, because no one could quite anticipate how much territory one pack might occupy. Because, you know, research done in Tanzania will tell you that a wild dog pack needs 100,000 hectares. Whereas in South Africa, in a more complex landscape, wild dogs can live quite easily in 15,000 hectares. What's been of great interest from this collar data, and in terms of these feedback loops in our management plan, we're finding that wild dogs to date have only used, even these 125 wild dogs that I've mentioned earlier, in about 8 packs, are only using effectively a third of the whole protected area still. And there's only actually ever been one breakout. So to answer your question, I know at a lower level, there's the wild dog management plan that is quite fluid. And at this stage, you know, it's really about running through every scenario you can imagine and being adaptive, and also just continually managing the risks. I guess if you immobilize a wild dog to change a collar, and you top it up with the vaccine, because we know rabies and canine distemper might be there. It's ongoing work with the community, where when we've brought wild dogs in before, they've brought the school children in to name the new pups and, you know, integrate community with wild dogs. So it's a very complex system, and I know I'm not giving you the hard answer you were looking for, but I think in terms of wild dogs, it's always just this complex thing, and more so at a higher level, like predator level and park level. I know they do have management plans and timelines and so on. I don't think I can comment on the detail of those plans. But yeah, I mean, the Gorongosa project have done a fantastic job setting up laboratories, getting some of the best scientists involved, and the collaboration is incredible. I mean, I can speak on behalf of the Endangered Wildlife Trust that just working with them has been an unreal experience.
And I would say, I would echo that with the other predators and the other animals in general. When the war first ended, the prey species rebounded. Many of them pretty significantly, pretty quickly, and it took a while. The few lions that were left did not, and so that process became. There were years where all it was getting rid of the snares that were everywhere in the park, and so that whole process of creating a situation where the risks had been mitigated for the lions eventually led to the lion population blossoming on its own without having to do introductions. And as Cole said, there's going to be, there may be a need for genetic reasons to bring in lions, but the numbers themselves have rebounded. So same thing with the elephants. We touch on it a little bit in the film, but they, the elephants were another situation where there were very few of them left, and as their numbers rebounded, they had quite a lot of work to do with the mitigation of human-elephant conflict there, and so they take all of that very seriously. And each of these introductions is looked at from all angles. To Cole's point about the scientists as well, there's ongoing scientific studies that are happening from other institutions, but also Gorongosa is, I believe, the first park in the world that has a master's program for conservation biology that is done entirely within the park. So these are Mozambican students who come into Gorongosa to get their master's and then go out and become, conservation leaders in other places in Mozambique and beyond. So I think that commitment to a scientific approach to conservation is one of the key elements that they've embraced really from the beginning.
Mm.
Thank you very much, Shahed, for adding this. And indeed, the part on the elephants, we can see in the film how they are some of the work to make sure they can cohabit with the local communities. But it's true that the film doesn't address in depth this what you just mentioned about the student opportunities and what the Gorongosa Park can offer as a plus. Let me just come back to Karen, just to come back on the role of CITES, that CITES plays in ensuring that the key species can fulfill their role in their ecosystems. Maybe Karen, if you could share something on that.
Thanks, Diana, and thank you both for your earlier answers. I thought a stimulating discussion. I could talk for hours with you about this. But yeah, so CITES, I think it's important to remember that CITES is a species-based convention. So our focus is on species, but it's an international agreement, has 184 parties or signatories to the convention. So it is the largest environmental conservation agreement globally. So it has teeth. It can take action if things are not running smoothly. So if we regulate trade into over 38,700 species, and about 1,000 of these then are in Appendix 1, which means the trade is not allowed. We can also enforce temporary bans on trade if the trade is not sustainable. So it's important to stress that when a party is trading in a CITES listed species, it must carry out what we call a non-detriment finding, or an NDF. And this is a science-based risk assessment to show that this trade will not be detrimental to species in the wild. And this is where CITES really does play a role in how does a country actually determine whether trade is detrimental. So we have a resolution which has guidance on how to make a non-detriment finding, and it asks parties to consider a lot of the factors that we have heard about already. So the historical and current range, the habitat, the species distribution, looking at its biology, life stages, so genetic diversity, the carrying capacity of the habitat, and all of these factors before they can determine what a sustainable offtake from a population would be. And obviously, in Article 3 of our convention, it says, and I have to read this so I get the wording exactly right, but it it is the role of the scientific authority of each party to monitor exports of specimens and wherever necessary to advise the management authority of suitable measures to be taken to limit such exports in order to maintain such species throughout their range at a level consistent with their role in the ecosystems. Now, CITES has a lot of guidance on how to make a non-detriment finding, but it doesn't yet have any guidance on how to determine what do we mean by a level consistent with their role in the ecosystem. And I think the Nature's Fear Factor film gives a lot of food for thought about what could be considered possible factors that we would have to take into account. It's not just about numbers. It's not just about prey and diet. There's so many other elements that are inextricably linked together in this. And I think this film really demonstrated that very well. CITES is working on, we have some decisions where we're working on trying to develop guidance on this. So that's why this discussion like this about the interlinkages and the effect that one species can have on other species, not just in terms of, eating it or not, is an important part of that discussion. And obviously, by protecting a key species, you indirectly protect the habitat, because there's no point. CITES is about conservation, not preservation. So, to preserve a species, you might only need to have a few specimens of that species, but to conserve it means you need to ensure its existence long into the future. So that's what we're trying to do. And another piece of work that I wanted to point out was that when a species ends up in Appendix 1 and trade is stopped, this doesn't mean that the species has been saved. In fact, it means that actually maybe we need to do even more effort, apply even more effort and actions to help the species recover. And so another area of work that we are working on at the moment is in relation to these Appendix 1 species, listed species. There's about 1,000 of them, just over 1,000. So we are working with range states of these species to see what actions CITES can take within its mandate, noting that our mandate is restricted to species and also species in international trade. So we're looking to see how we can help and work with the IUCN specialist groups on this as well. So that's why we've a lot more to do in understanding the role of species in their ecosystems. But I think while I have the floor here, I just want to say that as a scientist, I thought that this film did an excellent job of communicating the same message to different audiences. So for me as a scientist, it was fascinating to see how a small-scale experiment with the grasshoppers and the spiders be scaled up to a much larger area, but apply the same principles. That was really well explained, but I think as you said, it told the human story. It told the story of the species and the landscape beautifully. And I think that, for scientists, it's really important to be able to get that message across to a wider audience in a relatable way. And so congratulations to the makers of this film in doing such a good job of that. Thanks, Diana.
Yes, indeed, Karen, congratulations. And just to come back on something you just mentioned, which is the human aspect, and also Jared came back on it, on the links with the local communities, which is touched in the film. Making the link, and also making the link to a film we screened last week. How do we ensure that the reintroduction of predators has the support of local communities? Is this something CITES works on, or would you have something to share on that, Karen?
I think this is a very vital aspect, and that was what I was touching a little bit on when I mentioned, how the structure, the management of the national park was actually arranged, and whether there was sort of wider stakeholder consultation. But I think we talked in the film, they talked about the landscape of fear for the animals, but there is surely a landscape of fear for the local communities as well. When you're talking about introducing, large predators, and not even large predators, but also species that will be interested in their crops. It doesn't have to be a human-wildlife conflict in a direct sense, but they could come and damage the crops. And we saw a perfect example of this with the elephants in Gorongosa. But of course, elephants are, yeah, they're slightly more intimidating maybe than other animals that come and take the crops. But for us, and again, it comes back to this message of communication and, you know, working with the local community so they understand exactly the motives for this, that they get buy-in. So I liked the idea of, you know, asking the school children to name the cubs. I think that's a really good way of kind of giving them ownership of this species, so they will sort of embrace it and promote it. We see this in a lot of cases where communities live near crocodiles, and that, so we have, you know, CITES parties have found ways of encouraging ranching operations so that the local communities actually can earn a living from having this species near them. So there's an incentive, there's an economic incentive for them to be there. But I think one of the cleverest things I've seen in this film was the fact that by working with the local communities to address this issue of the elephants coming in to take the crops, they were able to develop not just a solution, a science-based solution, but also a nature-based solution. So by using these honeybee hives, but they probably learned that the elephants are afraid of the honeybees from that local knowledge. So it's the communities working with the scientists to address a problem, that it's sort of it's a win-win situation. And in that sense, then the communities, while they will always face a little bit of an ongoing threat from this, they see the value of having those predators or those animals there. And I think that this is a really important message, because if you don't have the support of the local communities, you're not, I mean, basically, you're doomed to failure, really. You really do need that local support. So well done again for coming up with such a clever way of addressing this. But yeah.
Thank you, Karen. Jared and Cole, is there anything you would like to add, replying to what Karen just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, Jared, if you don't mind, yeah, I think again, it's, you know, we're really living in a time where, you know, perhaps in the African context at least, I don't know if there'll ever be such a thing as, you know, we all wanted like pure coexistence, you know, wildlife and animals living as one. You know, there's always going to be, there might be fear, there might be that competition, like, you know, that like we just touched on. But I think where protected areas and NGOs and governments can really like step up is just from the lessons learned and these success stories we've had. So, and there's unfortunately like so many things in conservation and in life, there's no silver bullets or one solution fix all. So I think when it comes to these a system like Gorongosa, you know, it's about that community outreach, like I said before, bringing school teachers and the children in to see the animals, but then it's a two-way fold where, you know, the parks then go out into the communities and do the work there. And I think what's really, in terms of what's quite prolific in this day and age is, you know, we know there's a lot of poverty in Africa, and there's ecotourism models now that can really solve that challenge. And I know specifically too, in the case of Gorongosa National Park, there's so much tourism demand to come in and see the African wild dogs. And through that, if more lodges can be built and more tourists are coming in and there's more employment within the communities can start putting value onto the animals, and there's this exchange in information and passion and knowledge that develops. And I think those are the sort of movements we have to go, or that's the direction we have to move in. And then, you know, in addition to all of that, there's so many human-animal conflict mitigation tools that we can use. For example, just having the reserves, and again, NGOs and government supporting communities with, say, kraals, you know, a good kraal where you can put your livestock away at night. There's this through this new technology, we've now got camera traps. They're these products that make noise and flash lights if there's movement, and that deters predators. We've even got these livestock guardian dogs that will chase predators away from livestock. And these are quite non-invasive tools that allow, once again, a little bit more of a gray area between community and wildlife. So yeah, I think in terms of all these interactions and in terms of why these things take time, we really have to cover all our bases in trying to mitigate that conflict before it even happens, and then just be of the support. And the last thing I'll say, where Gorongosa once again have done such a fantastic job, is in times where there's been massive cyclones or there's been real issues in the community about it through a lack of education. It's always the Gorongosa project and the field rangers that have stepped up and used their helicopter and used their resources to go out there and help the people. And obviously they're doing that because they're good people. But once again, you're buying in that trust, that come the day a wild dog breaks out, you're going to have your support where they'll phone you and tell you, versus just killing the animal or trying to threaten the animal or be scared of the animal. So yeah, it's just about this, really this coexistence of trying to a two-way parcel that I think can be very beneficial for everybody if the time and effort's put into it.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. And as Gorongosa shows, it's another way that it's an example of the way conservation areas, national parks have changed. Gorongosa, when it was originally founded as a national park, was a place where foreigners came in to see animals and the local communities weren't even allowed in. And now the mission of the park is to create a better life for the people around the park as well as the animals. So, everything they do, they look at through that lens as well. And, there's other great examples that weren't in the film, that weren't even in our other film, where, things like coffee growing on Mount Gorongosa. Mount Gorongosa is the watershed for the park itself. Without the rainforest there, the park is in serious trouble. So they've created a way for the farmers to earn an income by raising sustainable crops on the mountain, which helps the rainforest, it keeps them from raising the rainforest. And so there's so many of these. Cashews is another project that they're working on. So many of these projects that are all about creating a better life for the local communities, creating better education for the local communities. And the way I see it is creating pride in the national park. If the local communities feel pride, benefit from, feel ownership of the national park, then it's not just about saving the animals. It's about a better life for animals and people. And I look at that. That's the future of conservation. Gone are the days where you only show the animals. The people are part of the story, whether we like it or not. And so the successful projects are going to be the ones that are embracing both the human side of conservation and the animal side.
Thank you, Jared. That was excellent. We are getting close to the end of this event. And I think we all feel we want to learn more on what's going on in Gorongosa and to visit also the park if we have a chance to go to Mozambique for sure. With what we have heard today, a lot of interesting stories. Before I close, just give you each of you. Sorry for not having mentioned that before. 30 seconds with a key message as we are celebrating World Wildlife Day tomorrow. A key message that that you would like to share, even though you already have shared with us very powerful messages. And I think what you just said, Jared, on the necessity of having this link to humans in conservation, it's something primordial. Let's start with Cole.
This was always a tough one. I think in short, we need to break the barrier between humans and nature and rebuild that connectivity, get nature back into our DNA and live with it versus trying to conserve it. So much of conservation is us actually just fixing other human problems, and just trying to really get in touch with it once again and draw some closeness to it. And that needs to be done, I think, through our schooling from a young age, throughout the world. That's my 30 seconds. Yeah.
Get nature in our DNA. Indeed, it's a message that the United Nations Environment Program and its executive director have been trying to share. And this week we have the United Nations Environment Assembly ongoing, with nature also as a very high topic on the agenda. Jahed, I move to you for your 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds. That's a tough one. So I think, I would say keep looking to science for the best practices for conservation. We work with with a collaborative called Reverse the Red, which is about applying assess, plan, act, techniques to conservation. And also as part of Reverse the Red and as a part of our DNA is looking for those conservation success stories, giving people opportunities to have hope, to be inspired, to feel that all is not lost. There's incredible work being done out there in the conservation community, and people need that. The doom and gloom, there's a place for that. It's important that we keep track of how serious problems are, but there's also a real need to show that there is hope and that we can make a difference, whether it's on a small scale or a large. We've got to be telling those stories of conservation successes to help people understand that they can help and that all is not lost.
Thank you, Jahed, and we have seen that you do that very well. Karen, over to you for the last words.
Thank you very much. Of course, the two previous speakers said everything I was going to say. Well, I can echo what you have both said. I agree with everything that you've said, but I think another message that came through from me from the film and the discussions today is the resilience of nature. And I think that's something we should not lose sight of and take that as a positive thing. I think that, and it was mentioned earlier about a colleague, I think, of Jared, who came closer to nature in his back garden in Bristol. But I think that COVID-19 seems to have brought a lot of people closer to nature, because the pollution decreased. You could hear the songbirds again, and people were in their homes and looking for things to do. And I do think that there was a lot more. They were out going walking because there was not much else that they could do. So we need to take advantage of that. That connection that people have now re-established with nature, even if it is just only on their small local level, and expand that up, scale it up to the global level. So this is a good opportunity to take advantage of that sort of mindset now. But I also agree completely that we need to not control nature, but learn to live with it and learn from it. It has lessons to teach us, and sadly, we're all living in a landscape of fear now, and even as humans, we don't all behave in the same way. So we do need to, have better collaboration, work together, and that includes all species, and it includes humans as well. So just on the final note, I know that today is not actually World Wildlife Day. This was done in the framework of it, and tomorrow is actually World Wildlife Day. So I invite everybody to celebrate it in their own way, to visit the World Wildlife Day website to see what activities are happening. And if you are holding an activity that falls under the framework, then put that up on the website so that we can plot that and see all the fantastic projects and work that is going on all over the world. So thank you, and thank you all for coming today. And I look forward to speaking with my two new friends here. I know Diana already, but in the future, because I think this is a fascinating project. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And maybe I ask my colleague just to share a slide where you see, yes, World Wildlife Day is tomorrow. Website of World Wildlife Day has been shared in the chat, and just bringing to your attention two events that are taking place tomorrow. The official celebration hosted by the CITES Secretariat, which is taking place tomorrow at 2 p.m. Geneva time, and also another film screening with a discussion on sharks, taking place tomorrow at 6 p.m. Geneva time. So we invite you to join the celebrations, and you will find many more occasions to celebrate the day on the official website of World Wildlife Day. So we encourage you to visit that website. Thank you all who have joined us for this discussion, those who will be watching the video later, and a really big thanks to our two new friends, Jared and Cole. It was really amazing to hear the stories you had to share with us. So a big thanks for taking time to being with us and sharing your stories.